I would say this is the most robust distribution network in the city, and right now all we need is your product to keep everything rolling. Look, the machine is ready to go as soon as I say go. After that, I'm basically...
A ghost.
Yeah, a ghost.
Now, a lot has been said about Tariq St Patrick and his journey throughout the series of Ghost. Even though we saw him standing in front of Chinadu making a deal, where in essence, he became the biggest goddamn drug dealer in New York, has he really earned the name of Ghost? Michael Rainey Jr. seems to think so. However, even though he has showed a lot of street smarts, he has made his fair share of mistakes. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, even Ghost had a few flaws. We wouldn't be human if we didn't. But with Tariq, there are some things he did which does make you kind of think, you really can't be this sloppy in season 4. And how can you say you're better than Ghost when you didn't even know who your father was? On the other hand, there are one or two things he did which I do think he did very well, which I don't think even Ghost would have done. And we're definitely going to get into that in a bit more detail in this breakdown. In terms of doing a complete character analysis, I do want to rewatch the series back from season 1, and the evolution of Tariq St Patrick and also Kane to Harder are definitely high on my to-do list. But the topic of discussion in today's video is, did Tariq St Patrick really earn the name of Ghost? We're going to run through his story arc from season 4, and how he ended season 4 on top of the drug trade in New York. I'm then going to come around to some thoughts and theories on why I think there's still so much more room for development, and the only character who could potentially one day tell him he is now worthy of his father's name is Tommy Egan. Just like Breeze once gave the name of Ghost to a young James St Patrick, I only think it's right for Tommy to be the one to give it to Tariq, passing down the torch. So, stick with this video through to the end, as we dissect why ghosts never die.
You see this bullshit right here? This shit exactly like him. Just like Ghost.
Well, if I ever see you again, maybe by then I'll be worthy of his name, right?
Now, heading into season 4, Tariq really had a big decision to make, a life-changing decision. Tommy gave him an ultimatum at the end of season 3, where he told him to pick a lane and stay in it. So, was he going to choose the life of a gangster, or was he going to choose the life of a regular civilian? I think we always knew the path Tariq would eventually choose.
I'm not gonna like it, but the boy gangster. He was born in him. I think you at that age. He cold with it.
Just like Kanan once said back in Power, he was born a gangster. And also according to Kanan Stark, he was even better than Ghost at the same age, which I think we can kind of only judge once we watch Power Origins. When we met Ghost, he was in his late 30s, depending on his actual date of birth, because the writers did change this kind of over the years. So, once we watch Power Origins, we will begin to learn more about Ghost in terms of what he was like when he was a teenager. We have heard stories from characters like Jukebox, such as how he always had his head in his books, but vicious with a piece, and that is something we need to see in Origins. So, we'll only kind of know once we see Ghost at a similar age. On Tariq, I think we always knew what path he would eventually pick, because there were always early clues which date all the way back to season 1, and we also saw a few in season 3.
Remember how Ghost always used to say there's only 2 ways drug dealers end up? Dead or in jail? Well, I think I found another way.
Do you really want to be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life?
But what if we don't gotta look over our shoulders, Effie? It was my dad that fucked everything up.
We know what Effie's end goal was. She wanted to hustle, but only to pay for her education, whereas with Tariq, he wanted this power. He wanted to feel this invincibility that he thought Noma had.
Look, I just need money. You know that power that makes you literally untouchable. That shit that Noma has.
Your dad tried that.
Yeah, but you know he didn't do that shit right, Mom.
No. Ghost was a lot of things, but he wasn't stupid.
It's also something very similar to what Drew said in 408. He loved the fact that he had this power and control under Detective Carter. That's the name of the game for some of these characters. They want this power and control, which only a few can handle. However, I think what also kind of made his mind up was the fact he lost his trust fund in the Western Holdings Ponzi scheme. Had he still had his trust fund to fall back on, maybe he might have thought about an alternative future. Maybe RSJ could have also played a role, or Simon Stern, because they are two characters who definitely saw the talent in a young Tariq. They would have also reminded him of a younger version of James St Patrick.
What are you here to talk about?
Just like your father. Always eager to get right down to business.
I'm nothing like my father.
Let's remember, we all heard what Davis McLean said in season 2. He would have made a great lawyer.
You know what, kid? You might make a decent lawyer someday.
And I do think I agree. Tariq is a very smart kid, and if he actually put his mind to it, after doing those extra years in terms of studying to become a lawyer, I really do think he would have been great in the world of law, politics, business, or whatever else he kind of put his mind to. However, the problem that Tariq found in the early part of season 4 in part 1, even though him and Brayden had this conversation about how it would have been nice to kind of just being two regular college kids, he never really wanted to be a regular college student. He always wanted more. He tried his hand at being a regular civilian by picking up jobs around the campus, such as cleaning and working at the candy store, but we all knew that would never last. We also saw something very similar in Raising Kanan. Rock tried her hand at being a regular businesswoman, but soon after, she went straight back to doing what she does best, where Stefano warned her, now that she's back in, there are only one of two ways out, death or jail. With Tariq, the fact that he had a busted up old car, where he couldn't even afford an Uber, he decided enough was enough, he wanted back in the game. Now this is where Davis McLean's connections came in, a connect named Zion, someone who ironically only took the meeting because of Tariq's surname, St. Patrick.
Thought you would too, given who your father was. I knew you knew how to solve a problem before it became a problem.
Now this is something I really liked about Ghost Season 4. Here was someone who not only knew who Ghost and Tommy were, but someone who put respect on their names. He knew how crazy Tommy was, and he also knew how Ghost was able to solve a problem before it became a problem. And we are going to come back to Zion and Ghost solving a problem before it became a problem in just a moment. In terms of Tariq, he did make a very clever move where he kept his hands clean, one of the laws from the 48 Laws of Power. He eliminated the competition in terms of Roman price by telling Effie someone was selling on her territory, knowing it would get back to Noma's organization, forcing her to do his dirty work, and there was the opening he needed to get in with Zion. But not only was he making moves to get back into the game, he also had Davis McLean playing his part in terms of getting closer to Noma. Davis gets what he wants, and it also works for Tariq. It was a win-win, and having someone like Davis McLean by Tariq's side throughout season 4 really was beneficial. He was Tariq's consigliere and kind of what Joe Proctor was to Ghost. Most importantly, his allegiances stayed with Tariq, even though you could kind of question Davis McLean's motives, because he does what he has to do to survive and win. He did stay loyal, and also got his hands dirty when he needed to. Now, something which turned Tariq's world upside down was finding out Diana was pregnant. He was on the hunt for Diana, because he wanted to make sure he dealt with her before the information got out in terms of Tasha being the one who shot Monet. Even though Diana didn't know who the shooter was, her leaking the location and knowing it wasn't Tariq did put Tasha in danger, and that's something Tariq couldn't risk. One of the main key goals for Tariq during the series of Ghost has been keeping his family safe, and I do think he did kind of succeed in that part. But finding out Diana was pregnant really did turn Tariq's world upside down, and I thought the Salim kill in 404 might have done so as well. This was one of Tariq's biggest mistakes in season 4, a very sloppy kill. He came to Salim's to find Diana's location because he had Pinky watching her from afar. And just a quick one on Pinky. Pinky really definitely came in clutch for Tariq a few times across season 4, and I do think having someone like Pinky who has a complete unique set of skills is definitely needed. So, could Pinky actually show up in the future for Tariq? But on Salim's kill, this really was a messy murder. Tariq only came here with the intention to find Diana. He never actually intended on killing Salim, and if we actually had competent law enforcement on power, maybe Tariq would have actually ended up in handcuffs, either for the death of Junior, Salim, or possibly even in connection to Steve's murder later on. Although Salim's body was never found, or is still probably kind of rotting in the kitchen, who knows. But moving on, Tariq had yet another big decision to make. What does he do now that someone who betrayed him not just once, but multiple times across the series of Ghost was pregnant with his baby? Does he stick by her and get on board with her decision to keep the baby, or does he cut ties? He decided he was going to stick by Diana and be there for her. However, he was still sticking by his decision of being in the game.
I don't need to be out of this shit to protect ya. I need to be on top, okay? That's how I protect you too.
Now I did actually begin to wonder, will Tariq kind of think twice about being in the game when Diana gave him a choice? A few years ago, Courtney Kemp mentioned in one of her interviews Tariq would come across someone that would make him choose between the boardroom and the streets, and I guess that was Diana.
Well, I want to be back in business with you, of course, with some, more favorable terms than I have with Zion.
Now in part 2, Tariq also had another dilemma. That was Nomar learning about his and Brayden's little underground drug operation. So, he had to find a way of getting into Nomar's good graces, and he thought, why not kill two birds with one stone? Diana was being forced to get rid of Zion. He was also causing issues for Nomar and Kane's organization. So, why not eliminate him as a favor to Nomar, in exchange for getting product under more favorable terms? However, Tariq and Braden getting rid of Zion landed them with being recorded on CCTV, and it also actually led to Felicia Lewis attacking Diana, which also resulted in the loss of her baby. It was tragic, but we always knew this baby surviving was a long shot in the world of power.
You said you learned from his mistakes, Reed.
Ma, I'm not Ghost. I can fix whatever problem I'm in.
Now, this is where Tasha came into the picture, and it's also where we have to discuss some of Tariq's flaws and weaknesses. Circling back to the beginning of this breakdown, I mentioned Tariq never really knew his father, and this was another example of one of those moments. He said he could fix whatever problem he's in, he's not Ghost. However, the thing he didn't know about Ghost was, for the most part, Ghost fixed a lot of problems before they became a problem. He was in control over a lot of situations, he was always calm. But even someone as good as Ghost, he also sometimes needed to turn to Tasha. Sometimes he needed the help of Tommy or Joe Proctor. When he didn't have situations under control, he always had a patient approach and eventually figured out a way. He also never let anybody punk him. He'd bide his time, be patient, and then strike. Ghost would never forget. Cantos the Weasel was a classic example. Where there was a problem, he would always find a solution. Now, in terms of why Tariq was here, Tasha was the only one who Tariq could trust and the only person who could get through to him. He also needed someone to talk to because of just what happened with Diana in terms of losing their baby. And I do agree with what Tasha had to say in this situation. That baby was hope. But Tariq's family was here. He can still be there for Diana, but he needs to be a lot more smarter and a lot more strategic. If the Tejadas are planning revenge, he needed to make sure it didn't come back to him, because Tasha, Yasmin and Grandma Estelle, they were counting on him. However, this is where we come to one of the most outrageous murder scenes that we've seen in a long time in Power. We all know what Diana did in terms of getting rid of Felicia Lewis. She then called Tariq because that's what she normally does when she's in trouble. She always calls Tariq. But I have said it before, as bad as what Diana went through in terms of losing her baby, this was Tariq's chance to just cut ties and go separate ways. I guess the baby wasn't supposed to be, and Tasha warned him, be smart, be more strategic. But what we saw at Felicia Lewis's house in terms of the kids seeing them, Diana reading the kid a bedtime story, them touching things with no gloves on, an entire crime scene downstairs where anybody could have walked in at any given moment, it really was crazy and outrageous. Who's to say Felicia Lewis didn't have a partner or a husband that could have walked in at any given moment? What would Tariq and Diana have done then? Would they have then had to kill them as well? I get Tariq wanted to be there for Diana, but Tasha told him to be smart and be strategic. But this was definitely the complete opposite, which also ended up with him being under Detective Carter's thumb. Now, how he planned to get out from under Detective Carter was by using Nomar to eliminate the threat. He keeps his hands clean and gets Nomar to do his dirty work. Unfortunately, we also saw how they decided to flip the chessboard. Unbeknown to Monet and Tariq, Nomar and Carter hatched a plan to get rid of both of them by sending them to Staten Island, where the Russians would be waiting. Luckily for them, Drew and Diana overheard and came to their rescue. This is where we began to see them put the wheels in motion to hit back, using something we've seen from Kanan and a few other characters back in Power, playing dead and having this kind of element of surprise, being able to fly under the radar because your enemies have no idea you're still breathing. He also couldn't do this without Effie and Braden, and in terms of his relationship with Braden Weston, we are going to come back around to that in just a moment. But this was another mistake from Tariq, and something Michael Rainey Jr. admitted in a recent interview, where he said it wasn't kind of Tariq's best of moments. He had the jump on Detective Carter, but allowed him to turn the tables and flip the script, and just like that, he was in handcuffs being whisked away, which Ghost would never, by the way. If it also wasn't for Braden, which I still think was an absolute crazy move, Tariq would have been done for, because not only did Carter have Tariq in handcuffs, he also had Tariq on video of him killing Zion, and that was a huge problem that they did have to deal with at some point in episode 10.
Carter has something on you, then you need to get something on him.
Yeah, level the playing field.
Exactly.
Carter had leverage over Tariq, so he had to find leverage over Carter, and we all know what leverage that would be. Detective Carter killing Kamal Tate, a congressman's brother, and he knew he had explosive information that would absolutely destroy Detective Carter because of who Kamal Tate's brother was. I do also kinda wish Tariq did let Rashad Tate deal with Detective Carter instead of his partner Nico Halston. I can see why he brought Nico in to flip the script on his former partner, or, as Nico thought, his brother. But I do wish Tariq made the call to Rashad Tate, because not only would Tate have blown Carter's dirty ways to the media, he would have also made his life living hell. It would have also served a way for Rashad Tate to eventually owe Tariq a favour, And we all know in power, that can always come in clutch, especially from someone who's so high up in politics. But the way he played it with Nico was also very smart indeed, and we have to give credit when it's due. He knew he had explosive information, but he thought, what's the best possible way to burn someone like Carter and also keep Nico on side? Why not have his partner flip? And behind the scenes, in the conversations we didn't kind of necessarily hear, Tariq would have spoken to Nico and told him exactly what Carter had done, something Nico already kind of had an inkling of. Not only that, he made Carter say it from his own mouth. He'll flip on Nico Halston in a heartbeat, his own brother, all while Nico was listening in. So, even though I would have liked to have Rashad Tate to have found out, I do think it was still a very clever move by Tariq, a very strategic move indeed. But with Detective Carter out the way, and with Kane dealing with Nomar, which also resulted in Kane having to flee New York, the path was clear for Tariq to finally become the biggest drug dealer in New York, because there was a power vacuum. Most of the infrastructure was also still left in place from Nomar's organization, which Tariq was more than happy to take over. He also did this while making sure his family was safe, and away from the dangers of what he was getting himself into, because he knew the risks. Tariq accepted the fact that he wouldn't be able to have a family and also be in the game at the same time. He knows family is a big weakness which can make him vulnerable, and that was one of the main reasons for Ghost's downfall, him trying to live a double life, a fantasy, trying to escape a life which was just impossible to leave, albeit there were multiple factors that kept pulling him back into the world, Tasha being one of the main ones. Early in season 1, if she kind of just saw James St Patrick's vision as a legit businessman and backed his vision to leave the game, things would have been very different. The problem was, she loved Ghost, not James. They were two complete separate people, whereas Angela loved James St Patrick, and that's what kind of made him sway more towards Angela, because she always pushed him to build his legit empire, not his drug empire. It's kind of what Tariq went through with Lauren. He really cared for Lauren, but mostly because in a world which was so chaotic around him, full of death and dark moments, she kind of represented something normal. In essence, I do think Lauren was Tariq's version of Ghost Angela, living this double life, especially across season 2. But Tariq acknowledged he can't have that. Whoever gets close to him either ends up dead, in jail, or gone, which is different to Ghost. Ghost was someone who still had this vulnerability around him. Something else which I did think he did very well was putting distance between himself and Brayden. Across season 4, we did see them going through their usual ups and downs, which was mainly due to Brayden being high on his own supply. It doesn't mean that he didn't have Tariq's back, because he did. He was the one who set up the new operation. He had Tariq's back when they were dealing with Zion, and also when they dealt with Detective Carter. They were both there for each other in different moments of season 4. But one of the problems that Ghost had was his attachment to Tommy. Felipe Lobos even said in season 2, Tommy was holding him back, and he needed to cut ties with Tommy. But we all knew Ghost wouldn't. He even told Angela she can have Felipe Lobos, but she wasn't going to get Tommy. However, with Tariq, even though it did kind of seem a little harsh, he did what he had to do, not exactly cutting ties with his brother, but putting distance between them, making it clear there was a clear chain of command and structure to his organization. They weren't going to be partners anymore, which Brayden reluctantly did accept, being in charge of the Fight Club. So, as harsh as it was, I can actually see why Tariq did what he did. As a distro, you do have to put distance between you and your primeras, so, in Tariq's words,
Yeah, a ghost.
he ended season 4 on top of the drug trade in New York, where he said, like a ghost, where he finally admitted that he was just like his father. But has he really earned the name of Ghost? Michael Rainey Jr. seems to think so, but I personally have a different perspective. If the phone call that Tariq had during the final end credit scene was with Tommy Egan, and if Tariq does go and help Tommy with whatever beef that he has in Chicago, if they do go off and merge both Ghost and Force together, where we see Tariq and Tommy running the streets in possibly LA or another city, we do need to see Tariq develop a bit more. We need to see him develop physically and strategically. And I think Tommy has to be his final mentor in the game, where he teaches, this is how me and Ghost did it back in the day. This is what we got up to when we were 17, under our old boss Breeze. We can hear stories, Tommy teaching him and mentoring him. And then, when Tariq is finally moving just like Ghost would, you see a smile on Tommy's face, where he kind of says, you know what, you're just like him.
Well, if I ever see you again, maybe by then I'll be worthy of his name, right?
If Tommy turns around and tells Tariq he is worthy of his father's name, which comes full circle all the way back to Ghost Season 1, Episode 10, that's the only way I'll be able to accept Tariq is worthy of Ghost's name. Again, we have to remember, a young James St. Patrick didn't give himself the nickname of Ghost. Breeze gave it to him after he had the ability to appear and disappear. So, I only think it's right that Tommy is the final mentor who gives Tariq that name, if he is worthy of it by the end of the next chapter. At this moment in time, I personally can't say Tariq is Ghost, because the fact is, he isn't. He may be on top of the drug trade in New York, he may have even done it sooner than Ghost did, but recency bias is real, and we only have to look at how calm Ghost was in situations, how strategic he was, how he was always 3 moves ahead. Keep thinking you're smarter than me, don't ever make that mistake again. For me, Tariq was way too sloppy in season 4 as a whole, and episode 10 doesn't change anything. Some may disagree and think he's probably done enough. I think once Tommy calls Tariq Ghost, once Tommy says that he's done enough and he's worthy of his father's name, that's when I think we can have that conversation again. But with that being said, the floor is now yours. For you, by the end of Ghost season 4, did Tariq earn the name of Ghost? Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.